Hello, friends. Welcome back. Last week we discussed slam dunk and how it demonstrates the pitfalls of toxic masculinity in the genre, and how it affects the relationships between the female and male characters, and how homosexuality was portrayed in the earlier works of the genre. Now we're going to be talking about Prince of Tennis. The manga, Prince of Tennis, was created by Takeshi Konomi, ran from July 1999 to March 2008 in Weekly Shonen Jump, and was adapted to anime by Trans Arts and produced by Nihon Ad Systems and TV Tokyo, running from October 2001 to March 2005, not including a few OVAs and movies. Unlike Slam Dunk, it is known for being unrealistic in its portrayal of tennis, yet retains the same status as a classic sports anime because of its intense action and, again, lovable characters. The anime follows child tennis prodigy Ryoma Echizen as he aims for the National Middle School Tennis Championships, along with his upperclassmen teammates, and finds his own connection to the sport outside of his tennis genius father's. Now, this episode we're going to be talking more about the design of the characters of Prince of Tennis, rather than the story. Apologies to any fans of the show. The characters of Prince of Tennis have been described as Bishounen, a Japanese term that translates to beautiful youth and refers to an East Asian aesthetic of beautiful androgynous young men. Bishounen anime characters are usually defined with slender figures, hairlessness, and narrow eyes, qualities that the male characters of this anime embody. The nature of sports anime in general would require a cast of young, athletic boys, which one could only assume would attract an audience so inclined toward men. There is a noted divide in Eastern and Western standards for beauty. While Western masculinity is defined by a more broader, physically dominant figure, there is an appreciation in East Asian countries for more androgynous men. It is a departure from the Western ideal of a tall, dominant figure. It should be noted, though, that despite this divide, there is a common theme of musculature being part of the appeal. Even as more slender figures were appreciated, the ideal male bodies would be made up of lean muscle instead of the bulk expected in the West. Of course, attraction to feminine men is not something exclusive to male-attracted women in East Asia, seen by the popularity of celebrities such as Timothée Chalamet or the global popularity of Korean idol groups such as BTS. Nor is attraction to the Western masculine ideal exclusive to the West. Studies have shown that men from the more youthful and androgynous side to the older, more mature side appeal to different audiences but appeal nonetheless. Is only speaking on the cultural level to which these beauty standards are applied. Kazumi Nagaike argues that male celebrities with boyish features, such as members of Japanese boy idol groups, embody a female idealization of non-threatening male figures. Younger girls, so inclined toward men, would be more amenable to a similarly young-seeming figure, as they are just starting to explore their sexuality in contrast to more mature figures. Shoujo manga, which is seen as the female counterpart to shonen, is usually made up of romantic stories, and the Bishounen style of men is often used. Basically, this style of boy has been found to be quite marketable among young women. The nature of sports anime in general would require a cast of young, athletic boys, which one could only assume would attract an audience so inclined toward men. While appealing to a male audience in search of classic shonen pump-it-up power fantasy fare, you could also draw in a female audience wanting to indulge in watching an entertaining cast of boys who are all young and attractive, flex and sweat sparkles. The Male Gaze is a film theory written about first by Laura Mulvey, about how the camera views women as objects rather than people, existing for the pleasure of an assumed heterosexual male viewer. In contrast to the male gaze, such a viewing of sports anime as a chance to drool over the attractive male cast leaves men as the objectified. This sort of teen romance genre is interesting in how it defangs the more vicious bends of masculinity to create an ideal man as an object for girls' affections. Theories of a female gaze, in contrast to the male gaze, usually take a softer approach, more based in empathy for the characters and the like, but girls can objectify men too. There is more of a focus on emotional needs when fulfilling teen girls' fantasies, but women can view boys as meat just as men can view women as such, and this sort of viewing of sports anime through a reverse lens allows for it to become very marketable to this new audience. There are 2 dating sims for Prince of Tennis, and it was even advertised in shoujo and other magazines marketed toward women. Of course, it should be noted that male-attracted women could get the same thing that any heterosexual boy would get out of the show, the same power fantasy and an attachment to the characters beyond finding them attractive. Also, accounting for women that aren't attracted to men. There are female characters in Prince of Tennis, of course, attractive ones that complement the male cast at every moment. However, as we discussed in the previous episode, they usually lack the same screen time and focus as the male cast, as they are not part of the main story, not being on the team itself, and at most taking up a managerial role. The same could be said about most sports anime. Women are thrown in as an afterthought. However, though they do play their part in their given gender role, as a pinky promise that these men fit into the masculine norm established, they instead feed into a fan base inclined otherwise. Not giving female characters enough personality or fleshing out the relationship with the main character in the first place leaves little attachment between them and the story. If you have a female audience focused on the boys as desirable objects of affection, and the only female characters are one-dimensional, it can be hard to engage in romantic subplots when the female characters remain so dry. The strongest relationships remain between male characters. There's also a fun trope where much of the female characters' affections are brushed off in a comedic manner by the main character, who is usually too obsessed with their own sport to think of anything else. This happens in Prince of Tennis a few times, I think. The first being the main character, Ryoma Echizen, not realizing that he's on a date with a girl, and takes her out to restring her tennis racket, and then leaves her behind and says something rude to her, while the rest of the cast looks on, like, exasperated. It's like a comedic moment. However, this devotion to the sport usually means they focus on the sport, not only the playing of the sport itself, but the people involved with it, their rivals and teammates. So while female characters are left to repeat the same three phrases and encouragement from the sidelines, the double partners of tennis frolic together in the cherry blossoms and share umbrellas, while the female characters are left behind during not actually dates. Sports anime often fails in achieving a cogent romantic subplot while grappling with its female audience. With Prince of Tennis, there are signs of a growing female audience solely with an interest in relationships between men, but we can elaborate more on that in a later episode. Now, the explicit. In the final season of Prince of Tennis, the topic of homosexuality is explicitly brought up. Two competitors in doubles tennis playing against our main cast are labeled the quote-unquote comedy duo, with an interesting tactic, using gags to confuse and disorient the protagonists. It just so happens that one of their main gags, one of the first pulled, is pretending to be in a romantic relationship. A team retches, yells, they get so thrown off they nearly lose the game as the characters, drawn to be unattractive, make body jokes about each other and pull down their pants clownishly. Of course, our heroes win out in the end, and the comedy duo reveals that their couple status is merely another gag they use to throw the competition off, and they barely have a relationship outside of tennis, because God forbid we have a gay couple even as a comedic duo. In the early 2000s, gay relationships were often used as gags, both in the West and the East, even while reality was much more bitter. From 1995 to 2004, while Tokyo participated in the United Nations Decade for Human Rights, Tokyo left out the protection of the human rights of sexual minorities. The governor of Tokyo outright voiced his apathy to the issue. Even as support for queer causes waned, the quote-unquote funny gay character always had a presence as a sort of entertainment. Gender roles were often broken in Japanese entertainment, from onagata actors, cross-dressing men in kabuki, and the all-woman Takarazuka drama troupe dressing as the opposite sex have been classic examples of playing with the gender identity in the Japanese entertainment industry. However, explicitly gay characters are usually left to be stereotypes, usually men with exaggerated feminine attributes making predatory advances on other male characters, usually to comedic effect. Portrayal of gay relationships was acceptable as long as it was a point of comedy or derision, the lisping sexual deviant. In places like America, things like the Hays Code enforced these tropes, endorsing quote-unquote deviant behavior, homosexuality, would keep the films from being distributed. The episode this gag couple was in was also seen as a parody by fans of the popularity of pairing other main characters together, mainly by the female audience. The disavowal was explicit now. The characters would not be together, in fact being so disgusted by the idea they nearly lost a match in a joke episode. It's always a bitter pill to swallow when queer representation comes in the form of comedy. Just existence of gay people shouldn't be something that's so inherently funny, and yet, you know? It's at least evolved from the outright hatred seen in Slam Dunk, but of course, baby steps. Next episode, we'll be going back to our roots of masculinity, but this time talking about what it means to be intimate, platonically and romantically, as a man. We'll be elaborating on this idea of pairing male characters together. We'll be talking about Kuroko no Basuke. I hope you tune in. Thank you for listening.